continuing a series called The Christmas Tree. How many people don't have your Christmas tree up yet? Okay, you're just not going to celebrate Christmas. I'm just playing. How many people do have your tree up? How many people don't have a tree or care about a tree? I'm just playing. Don't even say that. So anyway, but we're here to help you get ready for Christmas by talking about the Christmas tree. And the tree we're talking about isn't the tree that goes up in our house or the tree we cut down or whatever. This tree is the Christmas tree, the family tree of Jesus Christ. And in the book of Matthew, it lists the family tree of Jesus to prove his legitimacy to be Messiah. And Matthew includes a lot of names, and then some of the names in the lineage are not included. Now, just so you know, that's not unusual in Jewish custom. They didn't always include all of the names. Some people just weren't notable or whatever, and so they would skip a generation here or there, and wasn't a big deal. It's nothing scandalous, just didn't see the need. What I was interested in when we did this series was the names that he did include that you would go, why would you include that name? If you were just trying to prove Jesus' legitimacy, just trying to prove who Jesus was, why would you include that name? It's almost like some of these names, they're like the ornament on the tree that you see at somebody's house and you go, hey, everything's beautifully decorated. And then you see kind of this ball of construction paper that you go, why would you put that on your tree? And the family's like, oh, you just don't know what that means, right? And they tell you that story, and it's kind of a Hallmark moment. I can't even say the word because I'm so disgusted. How many people like Hallmark movies? So sorry for the men in your life. If you raise your hand just because your wife's here, I'm praying for you. Okay, I got you. But anyway, you get the idea, right? And you go, man, it's just those moments that you just go, man, this is really huge. And you put those on the tree, and you're like, man, that is so awesome. And so some of these ornaments we're pulling off, that's what they look like. They just look like a balled up piece of construction paper. You go, that doesn't belong on the tree of Jesus Christ. But they have so much meaning because the tree, the lineage, the family tree of Jesus wasn't just to show who he was, but to show why he came. And so we've been pulling one off each week. If you missed any of those, newbranch.net's our website. You can go back and listen to some. But today we want to talk about one, and I'll be honest with you. It is the weirdest part to me. And I have no idea. I left first service going, I don't know if we should have been sharing this, but yet there were some people's lives that were changed. And so I'm going, at that point, usually I know I need to get out of the way and just let God do what he's got to do. I almost skipped this story. But the more I wanted to skip it, the more the Holy Spirit kept pressing on me to go, but I put it there for a reason, John. So this is not going to be an easy 1, 2, 3 message. And I have a feeling for somebody, this is exactly where you're at in your life. It's not going to be an easy 1, 2, 3 message. And so let me introduce to the person and the reason why I say it's so weird. And when you see it, you may have never quite seen it that way before. It's found in the book of Matthew, Matthew chapter 1 and verse 6. And it says this, it starts to explain the lineage. And it says Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac was the father of Jacob. And it goes on down, and we get down to verse 6, and it says, and Jesse was the father of King David, and David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. You know how weird that is? Everybody else, to my knowledge, was mentioned by name. But this person is married to the greatest king in the history of Israel, King David. And she's referred to as somebody else's wife. That's a weird Christmas story, isn't it? The most notorious affair in the history of mankind. What is it doing here? That's messed up, right? Here's what we want to talk about today. Maybe this is where you are. What do you do when life gets really messed up? Anybody there? What do you do when life gets really messed up? If that's you, you're going to want to lean in to this story today. It's found in the book of 2 Samuel, and we're going to turn there, and we're going to look at a story, and I just want you to be braced for, this is not going to be an easy story to hear. This is a really messed up story. And you might be saying, just like I did, why would you share this story? One, because it's there, and two, because I think God wants to do a work. If your life is really messed up, you're going to want to lean into what God has to say today. 2 Samuel chapter 11 is where we first see this person. And I'll be honest with you, I've never heard a message about this person before. I never thought of that. I've heard a message around this person, but I've never heard a message directly about her. And then I started to think, because like as you prepare as a pastor, you go, hey, I got this in mind to share about this person. And then I started to look around. That's what you usually do as a pastor. You go, hey, who else is preaching on? Let me hear what they've got to say. And you kind of learn some things from other people. And I realized I couldn't find a message just about her. I could find a message about David. I couldn't find a message about Uriah's wife. So let me introduce her to you today. And I want you to look at this story, a story we've preached on more than once in this church, but we've never preached it through the lens of her. And I want you to think about how it would feel if you were her and what she might have been thinking about. Okay? 2 Samuel chapter 11 and verse 2, it says this. One evening, David, this is talking about King David, got up from his bed and he walked around the roof of his palace. And from the roof, he saw a woman bathing. I want to pause there, and it says, and she was very beautiful. I want to pause there just for a minute, just to make sure, just in case, if you're not part of church or you maybe hadn't been in a while or you forgot some of the stories, just to tell you who King David was. He's the same one that killed Goliath. He's the same one that became king of Israel, and Saul chased after him, and he wrote a lot of the Psalms in the Bible. He was a shepherd boy. For those of you who didn't know, he lived in ancient times, and he became king. And when he became king, something amazing happened in Israel. He was a very godly man. It said in the Bible that he's a man after God's own heart. And at this point in David's life, he had fended off all the enemies. It's believed that he was probably around 50 years old. And at this point in his life, he had achieved so much. And he had so much notoriety, and he had so much fame, and the people loved him so much. They believed, it said that they believed he was like an angel of God. That when David spoke, it was like God himself was speaking to them. That's what they believed. It's incredible pressure. Today's message, though, is not about King David. I just want to make sure you knew who he was. And he goes out on his roof. We don't know why he was home. The men were out to war. Some people said he should have been out to war. It's okay to take a break. Maybe he had post-traumatic stress and he gets up. It's really not about him tonight, but I have a feeling he was looking for something, and his eyes went and he saw a lady taking a bath. It's nothing weird. They took baths in those days, and he could have just turned away, but he didn't. Verse 3. And David sent someone to find out about her. You see, this is where the story kind of twists. I saw her, and now it's going a little bit further. Now I'm engaging in this. It's not enough just, hey, I saw it. She was beautiful, and I'm going to move on. It was, I'm kind of looking for more than that. And the servant comes back, and he basically says this, and the man said, she is Bathsheba. It's kind of ironic that her name is Bathsheba, and she was taking a bath. I don't know what that's about, but anyway, sorry. Just things I've noticed. I've never heard anybody point that out. Maybe there's something there. Okay. And she's Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. The servant is trying to wake David up. He can see, hey, you got something in mind here. You saw her, but let me explain something to you, David. And I've never thought about it through Bathsheba's lens, but who was she? She's the daughter of Eliam. You know him? I didn't. I looked it up. You know who he is? He's one of David's gallant warriors, one of David's mighty men. It's somebody David's fought with. It's somebody David knew. He didn't know Bathsheba, but he knew Eliam. And the servant's going, wake up, man. This is your friend's wife. This is one of your warriors. The guy that's so faithful to you. Don't do this thing is basically what he's saying. And her husband is Uriah. Well, who is Uriah? Well, Uriah is one of your most loyal soldiers. He's out there fighting right now for this country. But more than that, these guys aren't just, they're not just, their allegiance isn't just to Israel. You know whose their allegiance is to? Their allegiance is to you. You remember when everybody was giving you a hard time when you first came into the kingdom, David? Eliam is the one that stood up for you. This is his daughter. Obviously quite a bit younger than King David, huh? Here's how the story goes next. Verse 4. Then David sent a messenger to get her, and she came to him. I want you for the first time, if you've heard this story, to not think of it through David's lens, through Bathsheba's lens. What would Bathsheba think? The king has called me to the palace. She knew him. He didn't know her. Why would he call me here? Is it my dad? Her dad probably was passed. Was it my husband? What was going through her mind? She didn't know why he summoned her there. This isn't a person that he knew, obviously, because he asked who she was. He was older than her. Her family respected him. You see, she saw him for everything that he was. She had seen him and been taught about him from the time she was little. I remember the epic battles. Her dad would remember that, right? And tell her, this is a great king. This is a king who loves God. This is a king who wouldn't do anything to harm us. He is like an angel of God when he speaks. And her husband is completely loyal. In fact, he's gone for years at a time to support the king. Not just Israel, the king. Okay. Let me read what comes next. Verse 4. Then David sent for her to get her, and she came to him, and he slept with her. Please don't think that means he made love to her. This is some great love affair. She didn't know him. He's older than her. Now, I want to be clear. There's nothing that we believe that this was forced. It doesn't say David raped her. But I think it's two people that got caught in a moment, David full of lust, and she was just dumbfounded that he did this. It's super messed up. And you can see that by the end of the story, because what does it say? It says he slept with her, and then she just went back home. What do you think went through her mind? It didn't seem as though, the king summons you. Maybe you've always thought, hey, she had fault. Maybe she did, and maybe she didn't, because you're going, the king summons you. You don't have a choice, right? And then he wants to do this act, and maybe you gave in, maybe you didn't, maybe, I don't know. But all I can tell you is this, it's super messed up, isn't it? Super messed up. Why would you share a story like this? I didn't, by the way. God did. And he not only shared it here, but he shared it in the lineage of Jesus Christ. And you might go, well, no, he just mentioned Bathsheba. No, he didn't. No, he didn't. He gave reference to this story because you know what he said? He said, the mother of Solomon. You know who she is? She's Uriah's wife, not David's wife, Uriah's wife. Now, why would you bring that up at Christmas time, right? I mean, this isn't the kind of story that we sit around the Christmas tree and all the family comes and says, okay, well, let's hear about Uriah's wife. Okay, well, here's how it went. The king summoned her. This is not a love story. He had sex, right? He had lust, and he got her, and then what? Then he just sent her home, right? Then she just went back home to deal with this. This is sick. And probably nothing would ever be said again about it until this happened. 2 Samuel 11, verse 5. The woman conceived and sent word to David saying, I am pregnant. Now, maybe that doesn't strike you like it probably did her. First off, horrible, right? She's never had a child. That tells me she's a lot younger than King David, who's 50. Not a great experience here. But here's what's worse. Your husband's at war. It most definitely is not his. And you've never lived under Jewish law, but let me tell you what the law says, if you didn't know. If you get caught pregnant by somebody else, you know what they could do to you? They could stone you to death. I didn't always do that, but they could. You're pregnant? What would your husband think when he comes back and he's off to war and you're pregnant? And why do you think, because I kept thinking in my head, why would she tell David this, right? I mean, think about that. Why even tell him? Because he's going, you got me into this, man, and what am I supposed to do? Right? I'm pregnant, David, thanks. Right? This is what this stuff leads to. And the next part of this story, as bad as it is, this is really super messed up, but I have a feeling for somebody here today, your story's really messed up, and you're going to relate to this in ways that you can't even imagine. It's super messed up. And the next part of this story goes like this. David hears, and it doesn't say what he said to her, but he basically goes, hey, I'll take care of this, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of fix this. because I don't want it to be bad. So I think his intentions were bad, but I think they were also kind of like, hey, let's just make this easy for everybody. This is what's telling me he wasn't in love with her. He brings back her husband, and he says, hey, you go home and be with your wife. You're such a great guy, Uriah. Go home and be with your wife. Uriah doesn't even know the king, and he's kind of starstruck. And the king brings him to the palace, and he says, you go home and you be with her. And Uriah says, no. Why? Why no? Well, I say no because my men are out there fighting in the field, and I wouldn't feel right to be home with my wife while everybody else is fighting. And that kind of plucked David a little bit because he was home when everybody else was out fighting, right? Okay. Well, how about this? How about we have a few drinks? You don't believe this is in the Bible? You read it, 2 Samuel chapter 11, and it says David got him drunk, right? They start drinking together, and Uriah gets drunk, not because he wants to, because the king is like, hey, you drink, I'm the king, you drink. And he drinks, and he gets drunk, and he goes, now go home and be with your wife, and Uriah goes, no. And he just passes out and sleeps on the ground in front of the palace. And the next day he realizes this guy really isn't going to go home. This just isn't going to go away. And so here's what he does. 2 Samuel 11, verse 14, in the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. You know how sick that is? I know this isn't about David, but you understand what he just did? He takes a note and he asks Uriah to carry it. Maybe you don't know why. Let me tell you how bad it is. Verse 15. In it, he wrote, put Uriah on the front where the fighting is fiercest, and then withdraw from him so that he will be struck down and die. I never saw this, but did you read who he asked to carry the note? He didn't send this by telegram. He gave the guy a death note and said, carry this to the general. And Uriah is this loyal guy to David. He's the most loyal guy that David's ever had. Verse 16, you know what's coming, right? So while Joab had the city under siege, he put Uriah at a place where he knew the strongest defenders were. In verse 17, when the men of the city came out and fought against Joab, some of the men in David's army fell. Moreover, Uriah died. A lot we could say, but I want you to think about it from Bathsheba's point. Here's what it says about Bathsheba. We'll skip down to verse 26. When Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned him. And I don't think it's just the days of mourning so then I can finally be with David. Some people have taught it kind of like that. I don't think she had any feelings for David, and if they were, they weren't good feelings, right? My husband's dead. How long do you think it took her to figure out David did that? He didn't talk to her about it, right? It didn't say that he had her or talked to her or they're having some kind of affair. It was, I had sex one time with a lust-filled man just to get him away from me, right? I got pregnant, and now my husband's dead. I'm going to tell you, everything in me goes, this is not a Christmas story. I'm sorry, this is just not a good story. This is not a good story. So let me ask you a question, Matthew. Why do you put that in Matthew chapter 1 then? Why did you say it? And God just kept pressing. I'm going to tell you why I think he said it in a minute. But the story's not done yet. If you flip over to 2 Samuel chapter 12, for those of you that have read the Bible, then you know what comes, right? Oh, wait a minute. Here's what David does. 2 Samuel 11, verse 27. After the time of mourning was over, David had her brought to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But the thing David had done displeased the Lord. Couple things. She became his wife. You see what David was doing? You're my marriage, not because I love you, because I got so much guilt. You're the marriage to cover up. How does that feel? Right? Your first child is being born by a man who feels sorry for you, I guess. Just feels guilty about you. How do you feel about him? This is a marriage. What kind of wedding was that, right? I marry you you're going to have my baby, but we don't even know each other. You're probably young enough to be my daughter. This is disgusting. Think about it from her. And what does it say about God? And it displeased God. The thing that David did displeased God. You know what I didn't see? The thing that Bathsheba did displeased God. I don't want to read into that, but it never once says that Bathsheba sinned. It's talking about David. You had her brought. You did this act. You did this thing. It's your fault, and now I'm paying the consequence. When I wrote this message, I had in mind to say this. We were talking about ornaments of grace for the person that's hopeless and distressed. And today was going to be God's ornament of grace to the guilty. And then I actually reread the story from her point of view, and I realized I don't know how guilty she was, but I do know this: she was hurting. Somebody here today, that's right where you are. And as this thing displeased God, this thing that someone else did to her displeased God. In 2 Samuel chapter 12, here's what happens next. God is displeased. So he sends the prophet Nathan to David. You see, David thinks, hey, I got this thing all wrapped up. I know it's not the best of circumstances, but we're going to make the best out of this thing, and everybody's going to be okay, and everybody's better off not knowing this story. And the prophet Nathan comes and says, God knows what you did. And David says, I'm sorry for what I did. And Nathan says, okay, but here's the thing. Here's the consequence of your sin, David. But because by doing this you have shown contempt for the Lord, the son born to you will die. And today I don't want you to think of that through David's lens. I want you to think of it through Bathsheba's lens. And her son died. The only good thing that comes out of this hideous story, and he dies. You know what I would say? I would say life got really messed up. Why would God share this? Have you ever thought of that? Why would God share this story? He didn't have to. He didn't have to put in all the details, but he did. And why on earth would he, in Matthew chapter 1, when we're talking about the birth of Messiah, mention this hideous story? We're all sitting around the Christmas table. Hey, why don't we pull out some of these and look at some of these names, and you start reading this with your kids? How would you feel, right? I couldn't figure it out. Why would you do that? Until I realized. I started thinking of the stories that I know, right? When you really sit around the Christmas table and we all go around and tell things we're thankful for. You ever done this? But what's behind it is stories like this. Is that true? That some of us, I know everybody's sitting real still like you don't know what I'm talking about, but I know your stories and you know my story. And you know the truth is that some of us have some stories that are just like this, and we go, what we like to do is we just want to put a nice bow on it and act like everything's okay, but it's not okay. And you know what I think I'm seeing is that God's saying, I'm not a God from a distance. I know exactly what's happening. And when things get really messed up, what do you do? And unfortunately, today's message is not just like, hey, this is just an easy thing to wrap a bow around. Neither is your life, but I have a feeling for somebody, this is what you've been wrestling with. And today you don't just need, hey, here's 3 points to help your life. What you need is, you need the perspective that God's about to give you that will change everything if you'll let it. It might be something that you've heard, but you have in your mind, and I have a feeling you're just like me, that it's like you get this thing in your mind and you go, but if you really knew what my life was like, you couldn't believe God could do anything in my situation. And I want you to think about, by saying that, if God could do something in Bathsheba's situation, could he do something for you? This is a really messed up story. I want to tell you how the story goes, or at least as much as we know of it. David, in 2 Samuel chapter 12, repents, honestly, genuinely. David's a man after God's own heart, not because he didn't make mistakes, because clearly he's one of the worst people that ever lived, according to this statement, right? But he repented. And here's what happens next. Then David comforted his wife Bathsheba. That's the first time she's ever been called his wife. Up till now, he never treated her like a wife. I'm not sure they ever had interaction besides the one time, right? The one time he got his lust fulfilled and she left going, I don't know what just happened to me. Maybe I should have said no. Maybe something, who knows? This is really messed up. It happened. Let's just move on. We can't move on. All these hideous things happen. And after David repented, God did something in his life, and he comforted Bathsheba. I don't want you to think this was just a night. That's not true. For those of you that have really messed up like this, you can't fix those things in a night. That's not how it works. This isn't about a sexual love affair relationship. This is about a person that saw another person, and he saw what happened, and he's like, this has been a hideous story from beginning to end. And God gave him a love for Bathsheba, and he loved her. And he went to her, and he made love to her. That's the first time we see that. Did you know? Nothing about this story had to do with love. If anybody's thinking about sexual affairs, then read this story and ask me if it's worth it, right? But he took two very messed up people. Two very messed up people. Can I say that? And David went to her, and he made love to her, and she gave birth to a son, and they named him Solomon. And the Lord loved him. The Lord loved David and forgave him. And the Lord loved Solomon and made him into a great king. And the Lord loved Bathsheba, a lady that was in one of the worst circumstances I've ever heard of, right? Well, why do you share this story, right? I want to be clear, this story doesn't go like maybe you think, hey, and they lived happily ever after, man. If you read the rest of Samuel, you'll realize the sword never left David's household. He had things that happened in his family that was so dysfunctional. And everybody thinks, hey, that was, the Bible is not for today's time. I'm telling you, if your family's more dysfunctional than this, I don't know how it could be, right? I mean, like, it's not possible. But if it is, it's okay. But I'm saying, it's like reading Jerry Springer or something, right? And some of you guys, that's right where you live, right? Right? Is this not where some of us are living? It's like life is super messed up, and what could God possibly do? And in a life like Bathsheba, so hurting, God did something here. I want to give you a couple things to hang on to, but I want you to see something where it ends up. Matthew chapter 1 and verse 6. If I could read it to you again. And Jesse, the father of King David, now you know who they are. And David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. I kind of wondered, why did God mention Uriah here? You know why God did it? Because he's saying, I don't hide things. You know what the problem in the church is? We hide things. Sometimes we hide abuse. Sometimes we hide other things. We hide behind all this stuff. And we go, God can't handle that, so we just act like it doesn't exist. And then we sing praise songs. And the way we do it is we kind of go, hey, we don't really see that stuff over there, right? Because God's way up in heaven, and he's looking down. And the thing is, really, God's looking from a distance, so it all looks better from up there. And you know what this says? No, God's up close and personal. God knows exactly where you are. And if your life is really messed up, I think this is helping you today. Because somebody's here and you're going, my life is really messed up and I don't know what to do with this, and church doesn't make sense. And I've watched people walk away from church, including myself, because what you're saying and what my life really is like is two different things. And God is saying, no, it isn't. I know exactly how messed up this world can be. And I can help you if you'll let me. Just like I did Bathsheba. I want to give you several things to write down because you may need, just like I do, some things to reference. This might take you a while to grasp. Like I said, this isn't just an easy thing. And I wanted to take a pass. But I have a feeling the reason why I can't, and usually when this happens, there's somebody that needs this. So let me give you a couple things that you can write down. To the person that's guilty, even though this is not about King David, maybe Bathsheba had some guilt, who knows? But I want to give you two psalms that were written out of this. David was a songwriter, and he wrote two psalms out of this. One of them was Psalms 32, and one was Psalms 51. I just want you to have those. They were inspired by what occurred here. The other psalm that I want you to see is this, Psalms 23. Most of you guys know it as the shepherd's psalm. If you've been to a funeral, you've probably heard it. It's one of the most poetic verses in all the Bible. But we taught on it a couple months ago. And in the psalm, it says, the Lord is my shepherd. I just wanted to get you an idea. But halfway through it, you know what it says? It says, and he prepares a table before me. The table of God always represents God's blessings. And he says, I prepare my table before you in the presence of your enemies. You know what it means? It means you get to the table of blessings of God and your enemies are all around it. And he says, if you'll let me, what I want to do is I want to turn the tables on your enemies. I want to turn the table on your horrible circumstances. And I want to make them feed you. I want to make them, they're going to give you my blessings. You don't think it's possible, but it's possible. You don't think that God could do something in this hideous story, but he does. I want to be clear on what it doesn't mean. It doesn't negate what happened in your life. It doesn't take everything that's bad and suddenly make that good. That's not what we're talking about, okay? What we're talking about is this, is that God can turn the tables on the horrible things in your life and bless your life through the horrible things. I don't know how he does it. It doesn't mean the things that happen in your life are a blessing. That's not what it means. Some of you guys know that. But it means he can take them and bring about good. I'll give you a verse of scripture that might help you with that. Romans chapter 8 and verse 28, it says this, and we know in all these things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. It doesn't say all things are good. It says God can take things that are horrible and bring good out of them. I just want to be clear on that. The ingredient in and of itself could be hideous, just like the ingredients that we cook with can be hideous. Do you agree with that? You don't believe that this Christmas you're going to be cooking. Just instead of making something out of it, say, hey, you know what we're going to do this year? We're just going to eat the ingredients by themselves. Okay? Try it. Okay? Just try it. If you think I'm saying if I'm saying everything in your life is good, then try some of the ingredients by themselves. Be careful. They may make you sick. They may kill you. I think we have somebody here that's on YouTube that eats all these things. And anyway, I won't talk about it right now, but she knows about this. And we got pictures of her throwing up on, anyway. She got some more views than I do, so anyway, whatever. You know who you are. But they do, right? I mean, if you go and take vinegar and just drink it and see what it tastes like, right? That's terrible. Did I say vinegar is good by itself? No. Is tarragon good by itself? Anybody tried tarragon? Go buy you some tarragon and eat it, right? You go try you some cinnamon, right? Just take cinnamon, and there's a cinnamon challenge. I don't understand this. But just eat the cinnamon and see what it does. Please don't do that. You have no idea. It's bad. It's bad. It hurts. You're willing to admit, I see. I got you. Feel you. It's horrible. Just like your life. I don't mean to make light of your situation, but here's what I'm telling you. God can take all the things in your life and he can bring about good. And he did that for Bathsheba, and he can do that for you. See, the good that came out of Bathsheba's life was this, is that King David loved her. Oh, their relationship was really messed up. But he loved her. And from their love came a son named Solomon, who was the greatest king that sat on the throne. He was the richest, wisest man who ever lived. And under King Solomon, the temple of God was built. The greatest temple of God was built in Israel. God had never had a temple. And Solomon was the one to build it. It says that the time of Solomon is the closest thing on earth to the kingdom of God that we've ever experienced. His government was the best, most sophisticated government that has ever existed in the history of mankind. Don't you wish we could have that? Right? Like Solomon, please. Give us Solomon. Their healthcare was awesome. Okay. They said that silver had no value because everything was overlaid in pure gold. Not kidding. But I don't want you to lean too hard into Solomon. That's not what this story is about. Solomon died a rich fool that his kingdom was divided. And the rest of the heirs that came after him, this is not a story that goes, and Bathsheba, finally everything was good, and it negated all the bad that ever happened in her life, and all the people after that were great, including King David, who still made mistakes, right? Solomon, who really made some mistakes. If you read about the life of King Solomon, he made some real bad mistakes that divided the entire kingdom of. And not only that, but the kings that came after him got worse and worse and worse. And they're all mentioned in the lineage of Jesus Christ. You know what I saw that would make me kind of laugh? I was reading about, hey, how do you handle the genealogy of Jesus at Christmas time? And there was a pastor that gave some examples. He said, please don't just pull out all the sinful stories in the genealogy. And then I started reading the stories in the genealogy, and I said, there aren't any ones that aren't sinners in the genealogy of Jesus. See, somebody here today, you feel like you're not a person that God can love. And he's going, you know why he shared this genealogy? Because God loves you right where you are. As messed up as your situation is. If you sinned against God, God loves you. If somebody sinned against you, God loves you. If your story is so messed up and so hurtful and so twisted that you're going, I don't even know who's wrong anymore. Kind of like this, right? God could do something in your life. You see, at the end of the genealogy, we're going to talk more about that in this series. But I wanted to leave you with this today because I think this is the big hope. What I think God wants you to do is this. He wants you to remember something. God wants you to remember this. When your life is messed up, he wants you to remember this. This is the only thing I want you to write down today. He wants you to remember. You ready? That God is with you, not against you. You said all that to say this? Yeah. But you had to hear this story or you wouldn't really believe that God could do it in your situation. You had to hear a super messed up story so you could realize that however messed up your life is, God still could do something with you. And if you go through the genealogy, I don't think Jesus is saying, I needed you to make me legitimate. Jesus' Father is God himself. Jesus was and is to come. He doesn't need to make himself legitimate. He shared the story to say, here's the best the world has to offer, and they're all messed up. And I came for those that are super messed up. Remember that God's for you. Here's the verse I want you to look at. Matthew chapter 1, here's how it culminates. Matthew 1 and verse 23. And the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel. You know what it means? It means God with us. You know what I think he's saying in the story of Bathsheba? As messed up as it is, Bathsheba, I'm with you, not against you. As messed up as the life of King David was, I'm with you, not against you. Solomon, with you, not against you. In your life, he's saying, I'm with you, not against you. And you might be saying, but my circumstances don't prove that, and I'm not here today to negate the pain that you feel or even try to explain it because I don't understand it. My question is because of what God has done through Jesus Christ, is that enough for you to trust God with the things you don't understand? Is that enough to put your life in there? Because what's going to occur for you is the same thing that's occurred for me. And that's this. If you'll place your faith and trust in Jesus, he'll help you with the things you don't understand. But it's a perspective change. It's not a circumstance change. You know why he wants to do that? Because the circumstances are like this. But if I finally had Solomon, then my life would be all better. But Solomon messed up. If my source is my circumstances, then my life will go up and down depending on my circumstances. Right? And how do you fix a story like this? You don't. And God says, look, I'm not going to explain everything, but what I will show you about me is this. Is it enough that my son has paid for all the sins of all of time? He bore it on himself. Is it enough that if you have sinned, this is enough to cover all the sins that you've ever done? Is this enough to cover all the pain that you've ever felt? Because you do realize that one person hurts another, and one person hurts another, and then hurting people hurt people, and it's just this whole conglomeration of hurtness. And God says, what do we do with that? Let me punish mankind. No, I'll take it on myself. Is this enough for you to forgive? Is this enough for you to be forgiven? You're starting to see the picture? The greatest thing in the world is for God to say, as messed up as it is, you know what I got for you? I can take your messed up situation and I can bring about good if you'll let me. But the only way it works is there's a perspective change that you need. You got to get your eyes off of those circumstances and get them onto me. And if you do, it will change your whole world. Okay, I got a couple of verses I'm going to share. They're not going to be on the screen, but you can write them down because I got a feeling you might need them today. Romans chapter 8 and verse 31. You can write this down. Romans 8 verse 31. What then shall we say to all in response to all these things? The Apostle Paul is writing to a church and he's saying, all these horrible things have happened. What then shall we say to all these things? He says, here's what we say. All the worst circumstances in the world, here's what I would say. If God is for us, who can be against us? I'll tell you today, God is for you. Well, my circumstances don't look like they are, but no one can get apart that Jesus Christ died on the cross for everything that's ever happened in your life. How can you say God is against you? Emmanuel, God with us. You're starting to see the picture? That he says the same power that it took to raise Christ from the dead is available to you in your life, in your circumstances. If God is for you, God is for you, right? In the book of Genesis, in the Garden of Eden, God started off with mankind. You know how he started? In relationship. And man broke that through sin. And it said in the Garden of Eden that God was with them. Jesus Christ restored that relationship. Did you know that? The worst part about what happened in the Garden of Eden wasn't death. It wasn't hell. Unless you define hell this way, separation from God. And he goes back and he says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to restore. As messed up as this world is, what this whole world is about is to restore a relationship with God, and I will be with you. That's better than any circumstance. I'll give you a couple of examples. Deuteronomy 31, these are just a couple. Moses wrote this to the children of Israel when they faced difficult times that they were getting ready to go into the kingdom, when they were getting ready to take over Israel. He said, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them. For the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. When Joshua finally took them into the land of promise, Joshua chapter 1 and verse 9, it says, have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous? Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you will go. In the book of Isaiah the prophet writes this in Isaiah 41:10. He says, do not be afraid, do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. You know what the right hand of God is? It's all power. I don't know if you know what that means. It's not talking about a physical hand. God doesn't have a hand. Okay, well, that's a story for another day. It means the most powerful part that there is, the right hand of the king, is the power. We'll come back to that. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Jeremiah 1:8, do not be afraid, for I am with you, and I will rescue you, declares the Lord. The prophet Jeremiah also writes, Jeremiah 1:19, they will fight against you, but will not overcome you. For I am with you and will rescue you, declares the Lord. If you think it's just Old Testament, at the end, when Jesus had his apostles and he said, hey, you go and you preach the gospel, and he tells them all the terrible things that will happen to them and the people that will die and be martyred and all this stuff, and he ends the Great Commission with this, and he says, and surely I'm with you always to the very end of the age. You see, we write that just like it's a salutation, like that's not the main point. The main point is I want you to do these things, but I don't want you to forget, I will be with you. I will be with you. If you want to know how the story ends, what happens at the very end? Revelation chapter 21, if you just want to see how important this is the theme all throughout the Bible. He says this in Revelation 21:1. He says, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there will no longer be any sea. And I saw a holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people. And he will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them. Paradise lost, paradise restored. But it's not about the place. It's about being with him, a relationship with God. And somebody here today, you need this, don't you? You thought God doesn't know your story. You thought you can't be honest and then actually have God do something in your life right now. But see, here's what you got to understand about Jesus. Jesus didn't just die on the cross. He did die on the cross. But he rose from the dead. And do you know where he went when he rose? He spent 40 days on the earth explaining what he could. And then he went to the Mount of Olives and he ascended into heaven. And then in the book of Hebrews, you know what we found out? That Jesus sat down at the right hand of God. You get it? See, you thought that was Old Testament, didn't you? Do not be discouraged because the Lord your God, right? Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. And Jesus Christ is sitting at the right hand of the throne of God. You know what that is? That's all power. Do you know what he does there? Do you know why he's not here? Do you know what he's waiting for? You. He's praying for you. Jesus prays for you at the right hand of God. That God can work all things together for good to those who love God. Whatever circumstances you're in today, he is more than enough. And that's it. That's the message. I don't have a 1, 2, 3. You know what I have? I just have one. Jesus. Emmanuel. God with us, not against us. And now, as a pastor, I've got to get out of the way. And God's got to do for you what only he can do. Okay? So here's what I want you to do. I want you to stand. And I want to pray for you.